Aw, Jeff, baby, I didn't mean what I said in my last video. You know I love you. If you had this kind of hotness coming on the PTR, addressing a lot of our balance concerns, why didn't you just say so? Here it is, live onto the PTR is the new feature that allows you to play while you queue, and they're calling it while you wait. In the options menu, this will be replacing skirmish, but you can still skirmish if you want to. It'll just be put into another subcategory. While in queue, players will now be prompted to pick, if they want to, between the following game modes. Practice range, which you now can enter as a group, skirmish, like you're used to, deathmatch, any custom game that you can play with your group or on the game browser. And Jeff said there's supposed to be a new mode as well. We'll have to check out if that's included. It's not described here in the patch notes, but more importantly is the balance changes. And let's get right to it. They're reverting the armor nerf. That's right. Armor damage reduction now is increased from 3 back to 5, which was a change that they made in the GOATS era. This might feel a bit terrifying, but honestly, this is the number value that the original game was based on in order to limit the power of characters like Reaper and Tracer, who have spread damage and deal small increments of damage. This should help bring that in line a bit and allow characters that have natural armor, like Winston and Reinhardt, to not feel like they're so paper thin like they've come to be. And I'll add, I think other characters like Orisa, who can headshot as well, probably has some damage thresholds where this matters. Other characters that have natural armor now will get a bit of a buff as well. You can expect characters like Brigitte and Torbjorn and tanks in general to feel a bit more robust with this change alone. But I know what you guys want to see, the hero changes onto Orisa. This one may shock you because they buff everything while nerfing her barrier. So the big nerf is that barrier health now goes from 900 to 600, which is going to make it super easy to focus. And when you add in the barrier cooldown nerfs from before, she has to use her barrier much more similar to how a Winston does now, where he just doesn't have it most of the time. Good luck. You have to use this thing tactically. And of course, when you add in the fact that Winston has a much stronger barrier now in comparison, him and Reinhardt are going to look like competitive options for anti-damage capabilities now that Orisa's barrier is much weaker. However, to compensate for this, they actually did a really cool thing. They made Orisa into the Terminator. She is incredibly good now at offensive brawling. She's even better than she used to be. And I hope this works out the way Blizzard planned on it. Because if you look at what they did, the base armor is increased from 200 to 250. That means she has 450 health now. Her fusion driver movement speed penalty has been reduced from 30 to 20%. This makes her feel like she has ice skates on while shooting, super interactive, and they also buffed Fortify, reducing its cooldown to 8 seconds. So you're going to need to have a much more distinct and bursty playstyle with Orisa, similar to what you're used to playing with the other tanks. As much as I didn't want double shield to exist, these buffs to Orisa make it much more fun to play the character. She feels like a BAMF now and is much more a character about mowing down fools and making offensive plays than being just an unkillable character. Well, she'll somewhat feel that way with her health and Fortify, but you at least can get to her and get past her now that her barrier is somewhat paper thin. But remember, we've played in metas where Winston's bubble felt like that too, but because he had other things he could do, like mobility, it wasn't like he was unplayable at those times, really. Orisa should feel kind of the same, but we'll have to see how her viability pans out when we take into effect some other buffs that came through, particularly to Reinhardt and in comparison to the previous Winston buffs as well. Next up, Sigma gets a very similar treatment that was given to Orisa, where they're transitioning power away from the shield into the rest of the kit. Experimental barrier's health has been reduced from 1500 to 900, and the health regen of the barrier goes down again from 150 to 120. This means you have to be extremely careful about when you use this barrier, and I don't mind this at all because it means you have to actually be skillful with it and far less set it and forget it. The combo of Sigma and Orisa may still be a go-to pairing for some situations, but it'll be done more so now based on their offensive capabilities rather than simply having offensive and defensive capabilities usurping the necessity of playing any other tanks. The Sigma buffs come through to his kinetic grasp, which cooldown gets a massive 3-second reduction, having it every 10 seconds. It's going to be important because you'll need to be using this much more frequently now that you don't have a shield to rely on. But the damage to shield gain ratio also gets buffed from 40% to 60%, meaning that skillful use of this ability will be much more effective, and frankly, Grasp alone has the potential to be more devastating than a barrier anyway, since it can absorb infinite damage. But I think the one area that we'll remember that Sigma will feel much, much weaker to now finally will come full circle with the interactions with Roadhog, where now, with a much flimsier shield and the power going to Kinetic Grasp instead, well, Roadhog can hook you through that, Sigma, but Sigma does have the barrier that he can skill shot out to protect himself from Hog, similar to how like Winston can, has a little bit of outplay there. I'd say their relationship would feel a bit similar because Sigma can stun Hog out of Take a Breather and does a lot of damage anyway, but is susceptible to the hook and having his barrier destroyed. So that interaction should be more in line with what our expectations of it should be. Now these characters will be so much harder to play to get the value out of them that even if it does get played at the pro level, you know you can respect the amount of skill it takes rather than just naturally existing, having more resources than other characters. Nobody likes it like that. These solutions, I think, are a good compromise, but only time will tell if it has the effect that we want. The downside is, of course, these characters should feel a bit harder to play, competitively speaking, at a lot of the ranks, but to some degree, high skill cap characters aren't supposed to feel super approachable for all levels of play. We've talked about this in my video earlier, the relationship between Ana and Mercy. Hey, believe me, there's a ton of heroes that I'd love to play, but hardly ever get to because they're beyond my skill. That's just sort of the nature of Overwatch being a competitive game. So that brings balance to the Force as far as I'm concerned, if that works out as it seems they intended it to. But the next buff, I think, will get you really excited as well. They do nerf the overall shield health of Reinhardt's barrier by 400, but they move up his speed by 25%. Because remember, as I've told you guys so many times, when you combine Lucio's speed with your pushing tank, your barrier gets more value, which is the relationship that they're addressing right here. They buffed the speed that he moves with his shield, but because that gives it more value, they're reducing its health. But really, shield health isn't your goal with a barrier. It's gaining the ground to go in and smash some fools' heads in with your hammer that you want to achieve, right? The shield itself isn't the value, it's the space you gained from using it. So we may look out for his shield to not be healthy enough in the middle of a brawl while it regens and you need to pop it up again after you swing and fire strike a bit. But more likely than not, the speed buff means you won't have enough time to damage the barrier before he gets in on you, especially with that newly buffed speed boost. Is Reinhardt back? Well, remember, Orisa is a killing machine. She moves faster while shooting, so she'll be able to kite back from Reinhardt, advancing on her, and she gets fortified more frequently. So I think the jury's still out how that interaction's going to play out, but I think no matter what the outcome is, it sounds like it'll be more fun of an interaction rather than you just get wrecked by having the wrong cooldowns. Remember as well, Reinhardt benefits from that armor buff because that's so crucial to his playstyle. That chip health that he loses while pushing his face into damage and getting into areas was so important to his playstyle. And during the era of GOATs where they tried to nerf it from every angle, well, once you put that into 222, Reinhardt didn't have all of his GOATs buddies to keep him meta, and he sort of got pushed to the back of the roster. But these are some pretty promising changes and should shake some things up. I didn't even mention one of the last ones, which Rein's steadfast passive gets buffed by 20%, so now knockbacks will only affect him 50%. That's a pretty massive change. It already felt like he just brushed off CC altogether. Keep in mind that Orisa Halt doesn't count as a knockback and is still sort of the one major threat that is able to control Reinhardt, and perhaps will be the only way to stop him from W-Mouse winning over your entire team from now on. But I think one of the key meta pressure points you should look out for is Doomfist now getting pretty hard countered by Reinhardt. It already kind of felt this way, where Doom's abilities just sort of treated Rein like a bit of a punching bag, but couldn't kill him because Doom really needs to be able to launch his enemies, sort of like he does when he punches Sigma into a wall. Well, Reinhardt now isn't going to fly anywhere, is gaining on you with faster movement speed with shielding, and so it'll feel like Rein really can run over characters even like Doomfist. It already felt like you could to characters like Brigitte or Lucio, who try to use their boops against Rein. Now they'll feel like they do nothing, and in just a quarter of a second, he's already on top of you from the point you try to push him away from. So he'll run over those characters, but I think for him to ever be playable to some degree, he needs this to exist. So we will see how that pans out to Rein, but the devs do make a comment about all of the aforementioned changes, and they say the above changes to armor, Orisa, Sigma, and Reinhardt are aimed at decreasing the overall amount of time players spend damaging barriers while improving the individual heroes in the other areas. This is a significant change to the pace of the game, and we'll be monitoring these heroes closely to ensure they retain impactful gameplay in the tank role. I don't know, guys. I feel like they're speaking our language. These are good changes. We want to be able to have fun playing tank, and we don't want tanking to just be about existing with a barrier. We want to interact and make plays and do things, and damage and supports want to feel like they can shoot the tanks, not just a barrier constantly. So if this works out, it could be an amazing patch. Really, really good stuff. Okay, more changes. Moira, Biotic Grasp healing has been reduced 80 healing a second to 65 healing per second. That's a pretty big nerf. They say Moira's primary heal has proven to be too potent, largely due to its ability to heal multiple targets. This is not the nerf I wanted. I think this is a little bit of a mistake, but I will take any nerf to Moira at this point. My argument is, I think their big mistake with Moira was making her resource far too efficient. That's the issue. And it'll be interesting to see what you Moira players have to say in the comment section down below. But I think she was more fun when you had to make hard decisions on where to put your resource, but it was the most powerful healing in the game. It would run out and didn't regen very fast, but that was like the management skill of the character. Whereas now I kind of feel like she's just budget Mercy or a different Mercy version where she might as well not have a resource meter now that it is easy to regen. But the healing goes down to 65, which is a lot for an AoE, I guess, down a ton from 80, but I'm afraid that it's going to make her feel worse to play like they did with Mercy when her healing beam went down from 60 to 50. The damage breakpoints are really important, and I would rather Moira feel strong but limited, whereas on last patch, she was strong and just abundant with resource. By the time you ran out, you had Coalescence anyway. Now, with the healing numbers going down, Coalescence charge rates will be way lower, the efficiency will be way lower, and to play Moira is going to feel just as shockingly worse as it was to play Mercy, where you put that nerfed 50 healing beam on somebody and you're like, is this ever going to heal them? Like, pulling out your watch, checking the time, like, when is this going to be done? So you're definitely going to feel the loss of the power, but by any means necessary, I think it was pretty important to let other healers start to shine, and it'll be interesting to see which one comes out on top. I think easily Baptiste is by far the best now, but if Winston and Reinhardt start to look playable, then there may be a place for Ana as well, because she pairs with them a bit better than Baptiste does. But I think just pound for pound, mathematically speaking, Baptiste probably is the best healer in the game now, especially after his recent buff. But now that there's less shields everywhere, it may be that Ana's actually the best, because there'll be huge opportunities to land anti-nades on things, which might still be more powerful than anything Baptiste can do. So I'm pretty excited on how that interaction is going to play out, actually. In fact, this whole new world of the new PTR patch is exciting, finally. I can't wait to dig into it, but there's still more to break down. Diva's defense matrix cooldown has been decreased from 2 seconds to 1.5. The devs say with roll locks in place, there is some room to improve Diva's impact as a tank. So we're partially reverting a previous change, which increased defense matrix's cooldown. So this is the delay period in between uses of defense matrix. It used to be 1 second, got nerfed to 2, now it's halfway between. Yes, Blizzard, revert the GOAT's nerfs. This is exactly what we want. Because as they say here, they nerfed Diva because of her strength in GOATs, and now in 2.2.2, she's a bit lackluster. After playing with a lot of the other tanks and a lot on the Roll Q/Sigma patches, I think Diva's real problem is the other characters just can do more different things. Unless Defense Matrix gets back to its old glory days, it's hard to compete with a character like Sigma, who also has a stun and better range damage. And so yes, her damage denial might be more user-friendly than Sigma's, who now has a flimsy shield and a limited mini defense matrix with kinetic grasp. The problem is when you max out those abilities, they sort of overshadow what Diva can do. It's a little bit like how at high levels, you normally see Widowmaker, not Soldier, but the lower down the ranks, you probably like Soldier a little bit better because he just lays down his value in a more straightforward way. I know I want to be playing Soldier, not Widow, but the relationship here might be similar with Diva for a while until we see a bit more revert, I think. Because even with Diva getting these different buffs, it still felt like you probably should just play Winston and Wrecking Ball as your 2 dive tanks rather than Winston and Diva. But keep in mind that with barriers taking hits on all sides, Diva's defense matrix may look like a pretty important component to the game yet again, because if barriers are easily destroyed, well, in that world, the rapidly returning defense matrix that can deny especially hit scan damage and ultimates might be pretty good. Because in comparison, all barriers are getting worse, but defense matrix is getting just a bit better. So perhaps she starts to see a place again. I just kind of doubt it though, because the other tank's offense and lethality is just so much better than Diva. And a lot of times she just sort of stands around getting shot, where they are some serious powerhouses. Like, they just pound on you and can straight up win duels. Next up, they're giving a small nerf to Widowmaker's grappling hook, where her cooldown has been increased from 10 seconds to 12, and the devs say with barriers having less uptime, Widow will be even more effective at locking down long lines of sight. This change weakens her mobility so she can still be reasonably countered, and I think this is pretty reasonable. They probably could even have gotten more drastic with this, and I assure you the complaints about Widowmaker's strength are possibly going to be around the corner. Granted, Wrecking Ball and Winston are pretty strong, so perhaps she'll be diveable enough, but if she's stronger than most players would like her to be, I think they should continue down this route of decreasing her mobility. Next up, Torbjorn's overload cooldown has been decreased from 12 seconds to 10. Devs say Torb has difficulty in extended team fights once his turret is eliminated and overload has been used. This change allows Torbjorn to be able to rely on his overload more often. Yeah, that's true. I think Torb is a character that also would see significant buffs with the double shield meta and just shields in general going down. The Torb turret has always been pretty good up against diving heroes that have smaller health pools, but usually use their mobility to avoid damage. Well, you can't avoid an auto lock on turret, and with Torb being so durable, he can hold steadfast up against diving characters pretty well. So even without this buff, I think Torb probably wins in this patch. Next up is a buff to Genji. Can you believe it or not? A Genji patch note. What is this, 2016? Shuriken's ammo has been increased from 24 to 30. The devs say, as average hero survivability has gone up over time. Hold on a sec, that sounds like power creep, doesn't it? I thought that didn't exist in this game. Sorry, back to the patch notes. Genji can sometimes have difficulty finishing off his targets. Loosening his ammunition constraints will help give him a small boost. Yeah, no kidding, a small boost. Not much to write home about, but keep in mind, in a world where there's less shields, Genji more easily can farm Blade, and overall, I should have said this earlier, but with less barriers in the game, ult charge rates are going way up. You're gonna just farm ult constantly. As they said at the first section of the patch notes, this whole new Overwatch is going to play much faster. Big Daddy Jeff is taking the leash off and letting Overwatch run wild. I'm really excited to test some of these changes, but I'm also worried that it's going to feel extremely severe, where without the sustain of barriers and stuff put in the way, we may see team fights resolve way faster than you're used to, where it goes back to almost dive era styles of play, where the team fights are done in like seconds. Now, you'd think that wouldn't happen because of so many different sustain abilities in the game, but with Moira's healing going way down, and there just being less shielding, focus fire becomes so much easier. I think it's reasonable to say the game's going to get a lot more intense, but probably in a good way, because between goats and double barrier, there was just a lot of nothing happening and team fights unable to resolve because of all of the anti-damage. Now it may go too far the other way, but I think that's a better starting point rather than trying to catch up lethality to crazy sustain. Last patch note is to Zarya, whose particle cannon, just her secondary fire, gets some changes. Explosion radius increased from 2 to 2.5 meters, and the ammo cost goes down to 20, meaning you can shoot 5 before reloading. The devs say Zarya's overall damage output is in a good spot, but the secondary fire was left feeling a little too weak after the last set of changes. Totally fine. Please keep reverting the GOATS era changes. Yes, 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 Blizzard. Exactly this. The earlier video today, I was basically depressed. No, it's late into the evening. I thought I was done for the day, and they dropped this massive patch. Why didn't you just tell us at BlizzCon that you had this coming? You know how painful it was this past week to think you weren't going to nerf barriers? Oh, man, what a relief. This may put us in yet another wacky meta state, but at least it's movement, right? At least we're not resting on our laurels saying that it's the community's fault. I can't wait for this to go live. I think the game as a whole will feel a lot better, and a lot of players are going to be much more interested in playing tank again because the characters are interactive, not passive. You better bet that new Orisa's interactive. She's just straight up Arnold Schwarzenegger. She's the Terminator coming for you. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Are these patch notes over the top? Mostly what you were looking for? Or a huge mistake? I think it's a step in the right direction and the correct type of risk to take to try to improve the game. These changes could backfire immensely. I want to point that out. They're not surefire success fixes, but seeing them revert changes and be willing to deal with sustain in a huge way is a great step in the right direction to get the game playing in a much better spot again. And just a very calming state. I feel like my faith is restored a bit in the devs' ability to update PvP while still working on Overwatch 2. I'm a happy guy. If you're happy as well, be sure to hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already and hit the bell icon so that you actually get notified when our videos go live. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.